Picture a medieval university and you might imagine stone halls, wise old scholars and eager young students debating philosophy beneath candlelit arches, a world of learning, discipline and intellectual discovery. But that image is a polite fiction. Life inside a medieval university was a world of filth, violence, exploitation, poverty, arrogance and chaos. Students brawled in the streets, threatened townspeople with knives, rioted in taverns, and sometimes killed their professors. Lectures were often useless, degrees took decades, and many students spent more time gambling, whoring, and fighting than studying. Parents imagined their sons becoming priests or scholars. Many became criminals instead. To understand what a medieval university really was, you need to step inside one as it existed in the 13th or 14th century. Places like Paris, Oxford, Bologna, or Padua, they were not tranquil sanctuaries of learning. They were loud, dangerous, unregulated communities of young men, many of whom were barely teenagers, living far from home for the first time in their lives, armed with legal privileges that made them almost untouchable. And they exploited those privileges relentlessly. The first shock is the age. A medieval university student could be as young as 12. By modern standards, they were children. But these children were granted the same legal protections as clergy, which meant they were above ordinary civil law. Town officials could not arrest them, only church courts could judge them, and church courts almost never punished students harshly. The result was predictable. A young boy, newly freed from parental control, placed in a chaotic environment with money in his pocket, no discipline, and legal immunity, did not usually spend his nights studying Aristotle. He spent them in taverns. Life in the student districts of Oxford or Paris was notoriously violent. Chroniclers recorded stabbings, street brawls, and drunken riots as common occurrences. In 1355, the St. Scholastica Day riot erupted in Oxford after a student insulted a tavern keeper's wine. The argument escalated into a battle between townspeople and students. Over 2 days, armoured citizens stormed university lodgings, killed dozens of students, and wounded many more. Oxford students retaliated the following year by refusing to attend lectures, nearly destroying the university. This was not an isolated incident. It was typical. Tensions between town and gown were constant. Students carried knives, some carried swords, many hired themselves out as muscle, others joined criminal gangs. A medieval university was not a place of safety, it was a battlefield. Daily life inside the university offered no comfort. Students lived in cramped, dirty lodgings with straw beds that were rarely changed. Rooms were cold in winter, sweltering in summer, and infested with fleas and rats. Most students shared rooms with strangers. Privacy did not exist. Wealthier students hired servants to cook or clean, but poorer students ate stale bread and watered wine. Food poisoning was common, disease was constant, and death was always close. During plague years, universities emptied as students fled. Some never returned. Lectures were nothing like modern teaching. A professor stood at a lectern and read aloud from a book. Most students could not afford copies, so they listened and wrote as quickly as possible. Many could not read Latin well enough to understand. Others fell asleep. The quality of teaching varied wildly. Some professors were brilliant, many were incompetent, corrupt, or lazy. There were no exams at the end of each term. Degrees were granted after public disputations, where students defended arguments before an audience. The process could take 10 or 20 years. Many dropped out long before reaching that point. But it was not always the professors who were the problem. Students disrupted lectures constantly. They catcalled professors, mocked them, or threw objects. In Paris, scholars complained that students wandered in and out of lessons as they pleased, talking loudly or starting fights. In Bologna, some professors hired bodyguards. One medieval source describes a professor who lectured while armed with a dagger because students had tried to attack him the week before. The threat of violence hovered over academic life. A professor could be brilliant one day and dead the next. Money shaped everything. A medieval university was expensive. Students paid fees to professors, lodging masters, book lenders, and examiners. Many sold possessions to survive. Others borrowed money they could never repay. Some starved. Many gambled their funds away in taverns or brothels. A student might arrive in town with a purse full of coins and lose it all within a week. He might then resort to theft, extortion, or prostitution to survive. Medieval records are filled with cases of students caught stealing clothes from laundry lines, robbing travellers, or running illegal gambling houses. The university tried to discipline them. It rarely succeeded. And then there were the rituals, bizarre, humiliating, and sometimes dangerous. Initiation ceremonies for new students often involved public mockery, forced drinking, or physical punishment. In Prague and Paris, older students forced newcomers to crawl on the ground while being shouted at or beaten with sticks. In Oxford, freshmen were sometimes paraded through streets wearing absurd costumes, while upperclassmen hurled insults and garbage. These rituals were tolerated, even celebrated. They were part of the culture. Cruelty was tradition. Violence did not always come from students. Professors could be brutal as well. Some enforced discipline with strikes or threats. A few locked their classroom doors and refused to let students leave, even to use the privy. Punishments for academic dishonesty could include public shaming, fines, or expulsion. In Bologna, students once rioted because a professor tried to enforce rules they considered unfair. The university sided with the students. Professors served at the pleasure of the scholars, not the other way around. Books were precious luxuries. They were copied by hand, expensive, and often rented rather than owned. A student might spend weeks copying a single text by candlelight, paying scribes to borrow fragments. Errors were common. Illuminations were rare. Knowledge travelled slowly, unevenly, and sometimes inaccurately. Legends, rumours, and half-truths seeped into academic life. A medieval scholar might spend years debating ideas that were fundamentally misunderstood. And yet, this chaotic environment produced remarkable minds. Thomas Aquinas, William of Ockham, Erasmus. They emerged not from peace, but from disorder. One of the strangest truths about medieval universities is that they were international communities. Students came from across Europe, England, Spain, Germany, Poland, Italy. They spoke different dialects, followed different customs, and often clashed violently. Fights broke out between regional nations, semi-formal groups of students who banded together for protection. In Paris, the French nation fought regularly with the Picard nation. In Bologna, German and Italian students brawled in the streets. These conflicts sometimes escalated into full riots that shut down the university for months. Religious life permeated everything. Students attended Mass daily. Professors were usually clerics. Many students aimed for careers in the church. But piety did not prevent sin. Confessors recorded long lists of transgressions: drinking, gambling, fornication, blasphemy, assault. Some clerical students kept mistresses, others fathered children. Church authorities condemned these behaviours, but the cycle continued. The contradiction was obvious. Universities existed to train moral leaders, yet their students behaved with astonishing immorality. For women, the university was forbidden territory. Formal academic study was closed to them. The few women who learned to read or write did so in convents. Some worked as scribes or teachers in informal settings, but they were never granted degrees. Their presence in university towns was usually limited to taverns, kitchens, or brothels. Many were exploited by students who saw them as part of the environment rather than people. This exclusion lasted centuries. The medieval university was a male world, and almost always a hostile one. Despite all of this, violence, filth, corruption, medieval universities achieved something extraordinary. They preserved knowledge through centuries of war, famine, and plague. They revived ancient texts, debated philosophy, documented science, and shaped the intellectual framework that would define Europe for centuries. Their methods were crude, their discipline was weak, their reputations were often scandalous, but they planted the seeds of the modern university. Walk through the ruins of these old colleges today, and you might see quiet cloisters, tidy lawns, and carved stone lecture halls. But if you stepped back into the 14th century, you would find a very different world. You would see drunken boys fighting in alleyways. You would hear professors shouting over students who refused to listen. You would smell the waste in the streets and hear the clatter of knives during a brawl. You would see scholars living on the brink of starvation while arguing about theology. You would see the contradiction at the heart of medieval education, the pursuit of knowledge built on a foundation of chaos. This is the hidden truth of the medieval university. It was not a sanctuary of learning. It was a furnace that forged scholars through disorder, danger, and hardship. It was a place where brilliance and brutality lived side by side. And its legacy, strange as it seems, is the foundation of every university in the world today. This was hidden by time.